Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. The world of Harry Potter is vast, and not even 8 films could capture all the chaos, absurdity, joy, and weirdness hidden in the pages of the books. Many fans know there were moments that, for some reason, never made it to the screen, and maybe that was a mistake, or maybe it was for the best. Today, we're diving into the wildest, most ridiculous, and utterly inappropriate scenes that remained book only. Enjoy the video. Number 1. Harry nearly jumped off the VIP box, Goblet of Fire. Yes, you heard that right. Our beloved Chosen One almost launched himself off the stands in front of the entire magical world. During the Quidditch World Cup final, Veela, enchantingly beautiful magical beings, perform a mesmerizing dance capable of clouding any mind. Naturally, Harry isn't immune. He's so entranced he starts to stand, clearly preparing to leap off the box to impress the Veela. Thankfully, Hermione yanks him back by the robe. Bless Merlin, just like that, the boy who lived could have become the boy who leapt. Number 2. Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle, dressed as Dementors, prisoner of Azkaban. When your brain power is on par with an enchanted pumpkin, you eventually end up dressing as a Dementor. That's exactly what Malfoy and his buddies did. Knowing Harry feared the creatures, they decided to prank him during a Quidditch match. They should have thought twice. Harry whipped out his wand and sent a real Patronus at them. The trio got tangled in their robes and toppled over. Funny, yes, but also incredibly dumb. Dementors at Hogwarts? That's got to violate some school policy, right, Mr. Malfoy? Number 3. Valentine's Day with Cupid Dwarves' Chamber of Secrets. The castle is gripped with fear. Students are turning to stone. Rumours of a monster swirl through the halls. And Lockhart throws a love party. He hires a troupe of singing dwarfs dressed as cupids. These tiny creatures spend the entire day chasing students around Hogwarts, delivering valentines and whacking their shins so they'd stand still to hear love poems. One of them corners Harry and reads, or rather sings, a valentine from Ginny. Harry wished the ground would swallow him up. Unfortunately, he was standing on solid stone. Who gave Lockhart permission to host a holiday in the midst of terror? And how did Dumbledore let that slide? Number 4. Hagrid's racist remark, Goblet of Fire. The less you lot have to do with these foreigners, the happier you'll be, said Hagrid. Yes, Hagrid. The gentle giant, animal lover, and friend to all. Words more fitting for Lucius Malfoy or Uncle Vernon suddenly came from the half-giant's mouth, aimed at the visiting foreign students. Why? Maybe Hagrid had a bad day, or maybe J.K. Rowling did. Luckily, this never made it into the movie, because really, why destroy the image of one of the most beloved characters? Number 5. Crabbe and Goyle turn into girls' half-blood prince. When Malfoy is sneaking around Hogwarts fixing the vanishing cabinet, he needs watchers. Who better than Crabbe and Goyle? But not in their usual forms. They disguise themselves as girls. With the help of Polyjuice Potion, they become cute female students to blend in. But this raises so many questions. Where did he get that much potion? How did he acquire hair from actual girls? And why girls? Why not just 2 big, quiet dudes? It borders on the absurd, but it could have been a comedic gem on screen. Alas, it remained ink on paper. Number 6. Luna the Commentator, Cormac K.O.S. Harry, Half-Blood Prince. Quidditch returns in Harry's 6th year, and the second match of the season is legendary. At the mic, Luna Lovegood. If you thought Quidditch commentary needed names and play-by-play analysis, think again. Luna described how the quaffle looked angry and which surnames sounded nice. Meanwhile, on the field, things got heated. Cormac McLagan, showing off, grabs a beater's bat and, oops, smashes a bludger into Harry's head. Instant knockout. Game over for the Chosen One. This entire subplot was cut from the film, and perhaps it saved Quidditch's reputation. Number 7. Neville sets his pants on fire. Half-Blood Prince. A door on the 4th floor is locked. Peeves offers to open it only for someone who sets their pants on fire. Harry and Ron, being sane, go the long way around. But poor Neville ends up in the center of humiliation again. He literally lights his own trousers ablaze just to get through a door. It's heartbreaking, especially after Neville proved himself a true hero in Order of the Phoenix. Here he's back to being the punchline. Why didn't he think of a workaround? Why didn't anyone help? Possibly one of the most bizarre and sad scenes in all of Hogwarts history. Number 8. Winky gets drunk. Goblet of Fire. Winky wasn't like Dobby. She didn't want freedom. When Mr. Crouch dismissed her, it shattered her. She sank into misery and found comfort in the one place no one expected, butterbeer. Winky is not happy, Master Harry, she sobbed, her eyes red, her speech slurred. For humans, butterbeer was warm and sweet. For house elves, it was intoxicating. Winky drank it like water. Soon she was hiccuping through every sentence and collapsing in tears on the kitchen floor. Dobby, ever the optimist, tried to help. Winky does not want to be free, he whispered to Harry, watching her sway. But she wouldn't listen. Her loyalty to Crouch, her shame and her grief drowned in mug after mug of frothy drink. It was heartbreaking and ridiculous at once, a drunk house elf crying into her apron while other elves quietly pretended not to notice. The films never touched it. Maybe it was too strange, maybe a tipsy, heartbroken elf wasn't the magical image Warner Brothers wanted. But in the book, Winky's fall was real, messy, sad and unforgettable. Number 9. Harry and Ron fight a bush. Goblet of Fire. Harry and Ron were desperate. The Yule Ball was approaching fast, and they still didn't have dates. One evening, wandering the grounds, they spotted something unexpected. Professor Snape whispering with Igor Karkaroff near the edge of the Forbidden Forest. Both looked tense. "It is getting clearer and clearer, Severus," Karkaroff hissed. Whatever they were discussing, it wasn't meant for student ears. So naturally, Harry and Ron dropped to the ground to eavesdrop. Unfortunately, they landed in a bush, and not just any bush, a thick, tangled, vengeful thing that seemed determined to trap them. The branches clung to their robes and scratched their arms. Every time one of them shifted to get a better view, the leaves rustled like a warning bell. "Get off me," Ron hissed. "It's your foot," Harry whispered back. They squirmed, tugged, kicked and wriggled, creating so much movement they nearly exposed themselves. Snape glanced toward the noise. Karkaroff stopped mid-sentence, and still Harry and Ron struggled silently with the bush, trying to escape without making a sound. The tension of the adult conversation, mixed with the slapstick comedy of two teenage boys losing a battle with shrubbery, made for a ridiculous scene. It didn't make the cut for the film, probably because it was too silly, too awkward. But in the book, it was pure Potter. Danger, secrets, and two idiots stuck in a plant. Number 10. Fleur kisses Harry. Goblet of Fire. Fleur Delacour didn't hesitate. As soon as she saw her little sister Gabrielle safe and sound, she rushed over to Harry, flung her arms around him and kissed him once on each cheek. "You saved her," she said breathlessly. Harry froze, his face turned red. He mumbled something unintelligible while the crowd stared. He had no idea where to look. A tall, elegant girl, 3 years older, had just kissed him in front of half the school. Ron's jaw hit the floor. He didn't even try to hide his envy. "She kissed me," Harry stammered later, still dazed. "She kissed me." Ron, wide-eyed, looked like he'd witnessed an alien abduction. For all the danger of the second task, mermaids, icy water, time limits, This moment somehow felt more terrifying. Harry, already overwhelmed by the tournament, now had to survive being kissed by a part Veela champion under 100 watchful eyes. The scene in the book was awkward, funny, and painfully teenage, but on screen it might have crossed a line. Fleur was older, taller, confident. Harry was a shy, skinny kid who still hadn't figured out how to talk to girls. A dramatic rescue turning into a public kiss would have felt odd in the already dark tone of the film. So the filmmakers skipped it. No kisses, no blushing, just Fleur walking away. And with her, one of the most human, hilarious moments of the Tri-Wizard tournament. Number 11, Arnold the Pygmy Puff, Half-Blood Prince. Ginny Weasley didn't just have a wand and a broomstick. She had a pet, a tiny, fluffy creature called Arnold, her Pygmy Puff. He was purple, round, and usually perched on her shoulder like a quiet ball of fuzz. Fred and George sold Pygmy Puffs at Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, calling them ideal pocket pets. Ginny picked Arnold. "He's so cute," she told Hermione, giving him a gentle pat as he squeaked like a rubber duck. He didn't talk, didn't cast spells, he just existed. Soft, strange, and entirely hers. There's one moment in Half-Blood Prince when Arnold nearly steals the scene. A school owl swoops in through the window with a letter, and Arnold panics. He spins in circles, fluffs up twice his size, and dives under a pillow. Ginny laughs, Hermione rolls her eyes, and Harry watches, a little amused, a little confused. It's just a quick moment, but it shows something small and real about life at Hogwarts. A girl, a pet. A second of ordinary magic between dark chapters. The films left Arnold out. No mention, no puff. Maybe he felt too whimsical for a movie drowning in cursed necklaces and fatal potions. Or maybe the filmmakers thought Ginny didn't need a pet to define her. But book readers know Arnold was part of her world, and even if he never changed the story, he made it feel more alive. Number 12. Hermione and SPEW, Goblet of Fire. Hermione had always stood for justice, but in Goblet of Fire she took it to a new and slightly absurd level. After learning about the treatment of house elves at Hogwarts, she founded the Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare, or SPEW. She made her own badges and wore them proudly on her robes. She tried to recruit Harry and Ron, handed out leaflets, and even stitched woolly hats and socks to accidentally free the elves when they found the clothing. The problem was, no one else cared. "You're supposed to be their friend, not their liberator," Ron muttered after Hermione lectured him for not supporting her cause. Most students found SPEW annoying. Even the elves themselves didn't want to be freed. When Hermione tried to give Dobby a pile of her knitted hats, he was delighted, but only because it meant more clothes for him. The rest of the elves avoided the Gryffindor common room entirely, terrified of getting tricked into freedom. Hermione's passion became a running joke. Ron teased her relentlessly. "Maybe you should start a campaign for werewolves next," he snapped. But Hermione wouldn't back down. She kept knitting, kept preaching, even when it made her a laughingstock. The strangest part, her good intentions actually made life harder for the elves she wanted to protect. In the films, this entire subplot was erased. No badges, no hats, no rants in the library about systemic elf oppression. Perhaps the screenwriters feared it would make Hermione look pushy or naive. But in the books, it added a human layer to her brilliance. She was right, but also painfully out of touch. And that contradiction made her more real than ever. Number 13. Dudley's Giant Tongue, Goblet of Fire. It started with a toffee. A seemingly innocent, golden-wrapped sweet accidentally dropped on the Dursleys' perfectly polished floor. Fred Weasley didn't even try to be subtle. "Oops," he said. watching with barely concealed amusement as Dudley Dursley snatched it up like a starving dog. Seconds later, chaos erupted in number 4, Privet Drive. Dudley began choking, gagging, clutching his throat in panic. But it wasn't poison. His tongue was growing. It didn't stop at a few inches. The tongue ballooned, thickened, flopped out of his mouth like a grotesque snake. Aunt Petunia screamed. Uncle Vernon roared. Dudley collapsed, a metre-long tongue now dragging along the carpet. "Make it stop!" Vernon bellowed, but the twins were doubled over with laughter. It was a ton-tongue toffee, one of their experimental jokes from Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, and it worked too well. The scene in the book was a perfect storm of absurdity and revenge. For years, Dudley had bullied Harry, broken toys, eaten entire birthday cakes alone. And here he was, gagging on a magical prank. But under the comedy was something darker. Dudley wasn't just embarrassed, he was terrified. "He's suffocating!" Petunia shrieked. And for a brief moment even Harry felt a flicker of guilt. The films skipped it entirely, and maybe that was wise. Seeing a teenage boy nearly choke on his own tongue might have pushed the scene from comedy to cruelty, but on the page it worked. It reminded readers that the Weasley twins weren't just harmless jokers, their magic had bite. And Dudley, for once, couldn't laugh it off with another chocolate eclair. Number 14, Percy and Penelope, Secret Romance, Chamber of Secrets. Percy Weasley always carried himself like a walking rulebook. In the films, he's nothing more than a stiff prefect with a stick up his back. But in the books, particularly Chamber of Secrets, Percy becomes a lot more suspicious. He disappears for hours, he snaps at his siblings, he vanishes into bathrooms, locks the doors, and comes out flustered and red-faced. Even Fred and George start wondering what he's hiding. And no, it's not another secret meeting with the head boy. The truth eventually slips out, not through Percy, of course, but by pure accident. During one of the book's more quietly ridiculous moments, Fred walks into a deserted corridor and finds Percy locked in a passionate kiss with none other than Penelope Clearwater. That's why he's been sneaking around, Fred later tells the others. Caught him snogging Penelope in a broom cupboard. So all that pompous behaviour? A cover for a secret romance. What makes this storyline so bizarre isn't just the romance. It's how dramatically Percy tries to cover it up. Why is the head boy hiding from his own family? Why the secrecy, the locked doors, the cloak and dagger sneaking? He could have just said he had a girlfriend. But instead he acted like he was smuggling dark artifacts out of the castle. Even Ron was baffled. "Percy's got a girlfriend?" he repeats in disbelief. And there's another strange detail. Percy keeps choosing empty bathrooms for his dates, not the library, not the owlery. Bathrooms in a school plagued by a basilisk slithering through the pipes. "He's mental," George says at one point. And honestly, he might be right. Percy's little romance wasn't just odd, it was downright absurd. It didn't make it into the films, but in the books, it adds another strange, almost comedic layer to the mystery of the chamber. Number 15. Dobby's ridiculous hat, Goblet of Fire. In the bustling kitchens of Hogwarts, where enchanted pots stirred themselves and copper pans hummed gentle lullabies, a small figure emerged one chilly December evening. He wore a tea-cosy-sized woolen hat, stitched from various yarns of questionable origin. Pinned around the rim were dozens of buttons, each clashing in colour and purpose, some bearing slogans like SPEW Supporter and I Love Socks, while others jingled softly with each bob of his oversized ears. This figure was none other than Dobby the house elf, and his appearance that day was a patchwork tribute to freedom and self-expression. It was the 4th year of Harry Potter's magical education, chronicled in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, and while this endearing moment made it into the book, the film adaptation made no mention of it. Dobby's eccentric ensemble wasn't just a gag, it was layered with meaning. His attire spoke volumes about his rebellion against centuries of servitude and invisibility. The hat itself was knitted by Dobby in secret, each stitch a symbol of resistance. What made the scene even more peculiar was the way he paired this headgear with socks, mismatched, of course. One of the socks, striped in garish shades of pink and green, had been a gift from Hermione Granger, who had taken it upon herself to liberate house elves one piece of clothing at a time. This moment was rich in texture and sentiment, precisely the kind of oddball detail that grounded Rowling's world in emotional authenticity. The house elf wasn't trying to be fashionable or funny. He was celebrating a life he had never known until Lucius Malfoy unwittingly set him free with a sock. For Dobby, socks were more than clothing. They were emblems of autonomy. And what better way to demonstrate his freedom than by turning utility into art? Yet when the Goblet of Fire film reached theatres, there was no sign of the knitted monstrosity atop Dobby's head, nor the rainbow chaos on his feet. In fact, Dobby himself was entirely omitted from the movie adaptation of that book, replaced in function by Neville Longbottom, who hands Harry the gillyweed. The visual comedy and the thematic richness of Dobby's wardrobe were lost, along with the layered storytelling that made his presence so poignant. The filmmakers chose to streamline the narrative, cutting out what they likely considered unnecessary eccentricity, but in doing so, they erased a powerful expression of character. There's something almost sacred about the way Rowling used clothing as a motif for liberation. Dobby's wardrobe evolution was not merely a quirky detail, it was a narrative device. When he entered the kitchen that winter, he wasn't just a servant bringing Harry a pie. He was a free creature, bearing desserts tucked into the folds of his sock, not out of carelessness, but because he genuinely thought it the most dignified form of gift-giving. The book says Dobby was now working at Hogwarts, and he came to visit Harry, wearing a tea cozy on his head and several badges pinned to it. That sentence alone holds more character development than an entire scene of exposition. The omission becomes even more jarring when we remember what Dobby represents. He is the first truly liberated house elf, and his struggle is deeply intertwined with the broader themes of the series: freedom, prejudice, and self-worth. Hermione saw that clearly, forming the Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare, even if her efforts were often rebuffed. Dobby, however, embraced his liberty in the only way he knew how, by transforming the ordinary into the extraordinary. That absurd hat and those mismatched socks were more than just comedy, they were triumphs. Dobby's kitchen scene also deepened the emotional bond between him and Harry. After all, Dobby idolized Harry not just as the boy who lived, but as the boy who set him free. Bringing him pie, even if from a sock, was a gesture of uncontainable gratitude. In that moment, the reader feels the warmth of their bond, made all the more charming by the elf's obliviousness to social norms. He wasn't trying to be funny. He was being Dobby, earnest, odd, and utterly sincere. That kind of sincerity is difficult to replicate on screen, especially in a film like Goblet of Fire, which veered heavily into darker tones. The Triwizard Tournament, the return of Voldemort, and the death of Cedric Diggory all cast long shadows over the narrative. It's easy to understand why the director might have felt that a woolen hat with jingling buttons and socks full of pies could break the tonal consistency. But such scenes are the very breath of Rowling's universe, brief moments of humanity in a world teetering on the edge of chaos. One of the most memorable aspects of the books is their ability to oscillate between whimsy and terror without losing emotional coherence. Dobby's presence was a balm, an innocent soul amid sinister schemes. His antics weren't just comic relief, they were psychological relief, for Harry and the reader alike. After endless pages of danger and suspicion, Dobby appeared like a ray of lunatic sunshine, reminding us that this world still had space for joy. In fact, omitting the scene robs readers of the layered irony that Rowling so expertly crafted. The same elf who once punished himself for disobedience was now strutting around in socks that didn't match and a hat no sane person would wear. His transformation was not just magical, it was spiritual. Dobby had redefined what it meant to live with dignity, and he wore that philosophy quite literally on his sleeve, or rather, his foot. There's a gentle absurdity to the idea of gifting food via socks, and that absurdity is deeply human. It's the kind of touch that makes readers laugh out loud and then sit back, moved by the character's purity. When Dobby presses that sock pie into Harry's hands, the gesture is more tender than a dozen heartfelt monologues. He's not asking for praise, he's offering what he thinks is valuable. That's the essence of love in Rowling's world, unfiltered, odd, and deeply meaningful. Number 16. Fred and George bet on Harry, Goblet of Fire. Fred and George Weasley had always been the heartbeat of chaos at Hogwarts. Their jokes, pranks, and boundless energy lit up every corridor they passed through. Students adored them, teachers feared them, and even the most serious of Gryffindors secretly admired their fearless defiance of rules. But in Goblet of Fire, beyond the gags and fireworks, they revealed a much bolder side, one that dabbled in risk, rebellion, and high-stakes gambling. One particular moment in the book showcases just how recklessly confident, or perhaps foolishly loyal, they truly were. It was the scene in which they placed a bet on Harry Potter winning the Triwizard Tournament, not just surviving, winning. And they did it in front of the entire Quidditch World Cup staff with galleons they probably couldn't afford to lose, and with a man who would later become one of the most slippery characters in the series. Ludo Bagman. This moment never made it into the films, perhaps because it was too complex or too adult, or perhaps because it painted the jovial twins in a light that strayed from their usual comic role. But in the book, it served as a pivotal revelation. Fred and George weren't just class clowns, they were dreamers with ambition, vision, and an appetite for risk. They weren't afraid to play against the odds. When Bagman offered odds on the Triwizard Tournament, the twins pounced. "We'll bet 37 galleons, 15 sickles, 3 nuts," Fred declared boldly. Not a round sum, not something planned. It sounded like every coin they could scrape from the bottom of their shared vault. But that wasn't all. They wanted something more from the wager. "And we'll add in a joke product." The product wasn't named, but the implication was clear. They were offering a piece of their dream, a stake in their future joke shop. It wasn't just about money. For Fred and George, it was about belief. In Harry, in themselves, and in the path they were carving beyond Hogwarts. They weren't content with school pranks anymore. They were laying bricks for Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, and this bet was part of the foundation. But let's not ignore how unhinged their belief sounded. Harry was 14. He didn't enter the tournament willingly. He was going up against 3 far older and vastly more experienced witches and wizards: Victor Crumb, the Bulgarian Quidditch prodigy, Fleur Delacour, proud and graceful and from Beauxbatons, and Cedric Diggory, the golden boy of Hufflepuff. Betting on Harry wasn't loyalty, it was lunacy. But the twins were undeterred. In a tent surrounded by Quidditch enthusiasts among roaring fans and foreign visitors, they made their gamble. Bagman, ever the showman, smiled wide. "You're on," he said, as he pocketed their money with theatrical flair. The books make it clear that Fred and George were proud of their daring. They didn't flinch. Their eyes sparkled with the same mischief they reserved for dung bombs and disappearing ink. But this wasn't a prank. This was a calculated risk, And for them, it wasn't just about believing in Harry, it was about believing in their ability to judge a moment, to spot an opportunity no one else could see. As the tournament unfolded, it became clear just how insane their bet had been. The tasks were brutal and terrifying. Dragons in the first round, merpeople and a lake in the second, a deadly maze in the third filled with illusions, traps and darkness. Every step of the way Harry barely survived. He wasn't the strongest or the most prepared, but he was the most adaptable, the fastest to think on his feet. And, crucially, he had help. From Hermione, from Moody, who was not moody at all, and even from his own instincts, honed by years of facing danger. Fred and George never wavered. As the pages turned, their gamble seemed more and more like prophecy. When Harry and Cedric grabbed the cup together, the twins might have thought they'd lost. But then came the twist. Cedric died. Harry returned with the cup, alone. And while it was a tragedy, a trauma, and the beginning of a darker phase of the wizarding world, it also meant something simpler to two red-haired boys who once emptied their pockets on a hunch. Harry had technically won. They should have been paid. But the wizard who took their money, Ludo Bagman, had a secret of his own. He was deeply in debt to goblins. He was desperate. He was dishonest. And when it came time to collect, Fred and George found out what happens when you make deals with a man running from his own ruin. Bagman refused to pay. He tried to distract, delay, and charm his way out of the obligation. Eventually, he simply vanished. He did a bunk, Fred would later say, eyes narrowed with rage. This subplot added a layer of adulthood to the story that the films completely discarded. It wasn't about magic. It was about risk, betrayal, and what happens when boys try to become men too fast. The twins, for all their wit and spirit, were still teenagers, and they had been conned. But they didn't crumble, they didn't beg, they learned. They started plotting harder, working smarter, and in the end they didn't need Bagman's gold. They got their shop. They built it themselves. But the pain of that betrayal lingered sharp, unsweetened, and more real than any prank ever played. Leaving this storyline out of the film was understandable. It required context, exposition, and a slower burn than cinema typically allows. It complicated the tone. The Weasley twins weren't just comic relief here. They were hustlers, builders, boys with everything to lose and too much pride to admit it. But it's a shame, because this side of them revealed more about their character than any joke ever could. In their willingness to back a friend and to risk it all, they showed their depth. And in being tricked, they showed their resilience. Number 17. Snape insults Hermione's teeth. Goblet of Fire. In the dim, dungeon-like classroom where potions hissed and simmered under flickering candlelight, a deeply unsettling moment unfolded, one that never found its way onto the silver screen. The fourth year at Hogwarts was already fraught with uncertainty and danger, as the Triwizard Tournament had upended the rhythm of school life. Yet for Hermione Granger, one of the brightest minds of her generation, a moment in potions class left a mark more personal, more humiliating, and ultimately more formative than any external threat. The source of this moment was none other than Professor Severus Snape. It began after a minor explosion in the classroom. Draco Malfoy, ever the instigator, had cast a spell that caused Hermione's front teeth to grow uncontrollably. Instead of intervening, Snape sauntered over and peered down at her with his customary disdain. Rather than show concern or even neutral professionalism, he seized the opportunity to inflict emotional harm. "I see no difference," he said coldly, staring at the grotesquely elongated teeth that now jutted from Hermione's mouth. These 5 words would carry more weight than any spell cast in that dungeon. There was a particular cruelty to Snape's remark, not just in the words themselves, but in the context. Hermione had always been self-conscious about her appearance, her bushy hair, her large teeth, her muggle-born status. She had spent years enduring jabs from Malfoy and others, but for a teacher, someone entrusted with her education and well-being, to echo the same mockery was profoundly damaging. This wasn't just a passing insult, it was a calculated strike aimed at a known vulnerability. The moment pulled back the curtain on Snape's darker tendencies, revealing not just a man embittered by the past, but someone capable of small, intentional acts of emotional violence. Snape's words weren't an impulsive reaction to classroom misbehavior. Hermione had done nothing to provoke him. She was the victim of a fellow student's hex, and yet she was made to feel ashamed, ridiculed, and utterly alone. The power dynamics were unmistakable, an adult in authority humiliating a child, not in private, but in full view of her classmates. No intervention followed, no disciplinary action against Malfoy, no offer of support. Just a sneer, a verbal dagger, and silence. The classroom, already a place where Snape ruled through fear, became colder still. What followed was equally poignant. Hermione, deeply hurt but composed, made her way to the hospital wing. It was there that Madame Pomfrey offered to shrink her teeth back to their normal size. But Hermione, reflecting on Snape's comment, chose to go a step further. She requested they be shortened slightly beyond their natural length. In that quiet act, we witness a young girl attempting to reclaim control over her own body in the aftermath of being belittled. It was a decision driven by a moment of humiliation, but it was also an act of subtle defiance. If the world, if even her professors, would judge her by appearances, then she would at least define them on her own terms. This scene, so vivid and emotionally charged in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, was completely omitted from the film adaptation. The exclusion is telling. In a cinematic universe that ultimately leaned toward redeeming Snape as a tragic hero, moments like this posed a problem. They complicated his character in ways that weren't easily resolved by flashbacks of lost love or martyrdom. Including this scene would have forced the audience to grapple with the fact that Snape, for all his sacrifices, was also deeply flawed, sometimes even cruel. The films preferred ambiguity. The books, however, told the truth. Snape's treatment of Hermione in this instance wasn't isolated. It fit a pattern that had begun in their very first class. From day one, Snape singled her out for ridicule, mocking her eagerness, questioning her intelligence, and consistently downplaying her abilities. But this moment in fourth year crossed a moral boundary. To mock a student for a temporary disfigurement, particularly one caused by a spell, was a betrayal of the very position Snape held. It wasn't about enforcing discipline or even favoritism, it was about power. What makes this moment so resonant is that it lingers long after the book is closed. Readers remember it, not because of its narrative weight in the overall plot, but because of what it reveals. It tells us that cruelty doesn't always arrive with a thunderclap. Sometimes it slips in quietly, dressed in black robes, and speaks with a whisper. Sometimes the moments that shape us are not the grand victories or devastating losses, but the subtle humiliations that make us question our place in the world. The fact that Hermione altered her appearance in response to Snape's words says everything. It wasn't a glamorous makeover or a magical transformation to impress others. It was a girl trying to protect herself from further ridicule. And what's more tragic, she was right to do so. In a world where even your teachers can wound you, armor becomes necessary. Hermione's decision was mature, calculated, and quietly heartbreaking. Snape's fans often argue that his actions were the result of a difficult past, that his bitterness was forged by years of bullying, rejection, and loss. And while that may explain some of his behavior, it doesn't excuse it, especially not toward children. Dumbledore may have seen in Snape a man capable of redemption, but to students like Hermione, he was just another tormentor cloaked in authority. And that duality is precisely what makes this scene so difficult. and so important. The absence of this moment from the films does more than sanitize Snape's character. It robs Hermione of a critical turning point. We don't get to see her navigating emotional pain, taking agency, or drawing strength from vulnerability. In trimming down her story, the film trims down her resilience. Her journey is about more than academic brilliance. It's about surviving in a world that often punishes those who are different, smart, or bold enough to speak up. Number 18. Mr. Weasley versus the Lift, Order of the Phoenix. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, there exists a particular scene that, while delightfully absurd on paper, never made its way to the film adaptation. It's a moment that lingers in the reader's memory not for its importance to the plot, but for its sheer comedic awkwardness. Arthur Weasley, the ever-curious patriarch of the Weasley family, becomes entangled in a surprisingly perilous encounter with a lift. Yes. A simple Muggle elevator in St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries becomes the stage for one of the most hilarious and uncomfortable scenes in the entire series. It is a moment so perfectly in line with Arthur's character that its omission from the movie feels like a missed opportunity, or perhaps a blessing. Arthur's fascination with Muggle inventions is well documented throughout the series. He finds joy in rubber ducks, plugs, batteries, and buses, ordinary things rendered magical through his sincere ignorance. But in this specific scene, his enthusiasm crosses into embarrassing territory. After being attacked by Nagini and admitted to St. Mungo's, Arthur is recovering when Harry, Ron, Hermione, Fred, George, and Ginny come to visit. The tone is somber. The attack was serious after all, but the gravity is quickly undercut by Arthur's bizarre desire to show off his latest obsession, the lift. He is so determined to understand its mechanisms that he treats it like a complex magical artifact rather than a simple vertical transportation device. J.K. Rowling paints the scene with vivid strokes. Arthur is seen fumbling with the buttons, pressing one after the other with the eager expression of a child presented with a new toy. "Marvelous things, lifts," he says, as the others stand awkwardly, unsure whether to intervene or simply let him explore. "You just press this button here. No, wait, it might be that one, and the doors close all by themselves. Then it just moves." There is a beat of silence as the lift jerks and grinds, closing halfway and then opening again, making a metallic wheeze that suggests it has grown tired of his experiments. One can almost hear Fred muttering under his breath, suppressing laughter while Mrs. Weasley rolls her eyes. The scene descends from awkward to downright cringeworthy when Arthur manages to get himself stuck between two floors. His torso is visible from the top half of the lift, while his legs have vanished below. He chuckles in amazement, praising the Muggle ingenuity that allowed such precise partitioning of space. A Mediwitch rushes over in alarm, trying to undo the damage as Arthur shouts from within the shaft, insisting that he's completely fine and only trying to experience the lift from both perspectives. Harry, meanwhile, is frozen, unsure whether to be concerned or mortified. It's not the attack on Mr. Weasley that embarrasses him. It's watching him nearly kill himself by misusing a lift. The absurdity of the moment is not without charm. Arthur's genuine admiration for Muggle contraptions is one of the most endearing traits in the series. He is a wizard born into a magical world who has chosen to marvel at the ordinary. This reverse curiosity is both sweet and tragic. Sweet because it makes him the warm, quirky father figure we love, and tragic because it often isolates him from the more pragmatic members of his family. Molly Weasley's disapproval is always palpable, and it is never clearer than in this scene where she scolds him sharply for acting like a tourist in a broom cupboard. For readers, this scene is comedic gold. The slapstick quality, the impeccable timing, the awkward glances between Harry and the twins, It's a masterclass in physical humor, but had it been translated onto the screen, it might have landed very differently. One can easily imagine the filmmakers deliberating over its inclusion and ultimately deciding it would make Arthur Weasley look more like a parody than a person. There's a delicate balance between charming and ridiculous, and a moment too long with a flailing Mr. Weasley might have turned him into the wizarding world's answer to Mr. Bean. Still, there's something important about this scene that resonates beneath the laughter. It's not just comic relief, it's a moment that humanizes Arthur. In a hospital filled with pain and danger, where the threat of Voldemort looms and the walls echo with the groans of cursed patients, Arthur clings to innocence. His childlike glee in the lift's self-closing doors is his rebellion against fear. He chooses to wonder, to smile, to find beauty in buttons and boxes, even when his own life was nearly taken by dark magic. It is bravery of another kind, the refusal to be hardened by the world. Harry, watching him, sees something that perhaps the others miss. Arthur's fascination isn't foolishness, it's purity. After so many battles, betrayals, and heartbreaks, there is something refreshing in the sight of a grown man praising an elevator like it's a dragon. In that moment, Harry is not just amused, he's reminded of the good that still exists. Even if that good is a man getting stuck between floors while his family looks on in horror. The book offers this scene as a breather, a pause in the tension. Coming as it does after the serpent attack and before the climax in the Department of Mysteries, it provides levity, a crucial beat that allows readers to relax. But more importantly, it reveals how the magical and non-magical worlds can collide not through war, but through misunderstanding and curiosity. Arthur isn't trying to conquer or appropriate the Muggle world, he just wants to understand it, and he's willing to risk his dignity to do so. There's a moment when the Mediwitch, clearly flustered, asks Arthur to refrain from further exploratory incidents with hospital property. He nods solemnly, promises to behave, and then immediately begins questioning her about how the emergency brake works. It's a classic Arthur moment: good intentions, poor timing, relentless curiosity. Fred and George, meanwhile, are nearly doubled over, doing everything in their power not to laugh out loud. Hermione hides her face in her hands. Ron pretends not to know any of them. And yet, despite the chaos, there's no malice in the scene. It's pure, harmless mischief, the kind that defines the spirit of the Weasley family. Even in the darkest times, they find something to laugh about. In that hospital, surrounded by injury and worry, Arthur creates a moment that will be told around dinner tables for years. Not the attack, not the fear, but the time Dad got stuck in a lift and called it an astonishing feat of vertical locomotion. That Rowling chose not to bring this scene into the films is understandable. Film favors economy, and comedy in books doesn't always translate to screen. But something was lost in that decision, a sliver of warmth, a glimmer of humanity. In a series filled with battles and deaths, a man's awkward love affair with an elevator might seem trivial, but in truth it's one of the small, beautiful details that make the Harry Potter world feel real. The kind of thing that reminds us magic isn't just about wands and spells. Sometimes it's about seeing the world, even a lift, with wonder. The omission of this scene is felt most by those who understand Arthur. He is more than comic relief. He is a symbol of openness, of embracing the unknown. His delight in Muggle devices is not a joke, it's a choice. A choice to connect rather than separate, to ask questions rather than dismiss. In many ways, he is the antidote to prejudice. And nowhere is that more evident than in the moment when he stares at the lift doors, eyes wide with awe, and whispers, "Look, Molly, it's doing it again." The other characters might cringe, Harry might feel the second-hand embarrassment seep into his bones, and the readers might wince, But there's also laughter, and behind that, admiration. Arthur Weasley is a man who makes no apologies for his curiosity, even when it wedges him between flaws, even when it terrifies a Mediwitch, even when it makes him look ridiculous, because to him there's no shame in marveling at the everyday. And maybe, just maybe, the wizarding world would be a better place if more people followed his example. Number 19. Moaning Myrtle peeks at Harry. Goblet of Fire. In the middle of the dark, echoing silence of the prefect's bathroom, lit only by 1,000 flickering candles, Harry Potter sank beneath the warm, scented water, clutching the golden egg. He was desperate to make sense of its maddening, screeching cry and the cryptic clue it was supposed to contain. At that moment, he believed he was alone, just a boy, exhausted and confused, seeking answers. But the moment the egg opened and the wailing began again, something stirred in the water. Something else was there with him, hidden under the surface, waiting. And when it emerged, the scene took a turn no reader could have expected. Moaning, Myrtle, the ghost of a girl who died decades ago and now haunted the girl's bathroom, rose slowly from the water with the ease of someone who had done this many times before. She did not knock. She did not announce herself. She simply surfaced directly in the same bath Harry was using, her spectral form wet and shimmering like the rest of the candle-lit steam. She smiled, not the mournful, weeping smile students were used to seeing when she floated above toilets or wailed in her stall. This time her smile carried something else. Curiosity? Teasing? Something oddly flirtatious. Harry, predictably, was mortified, yet Myrtle, undeterred by his discomfort, lingered. She gazed at him through ghostly eyes, leaning closer than anyone would consider appropriate. And as if the intimacy of her sudden arrival wasn't enough, she made a confession that rattled the innocence of her reputation. "I do that often," she said, with an airy detachment. "Go into the bath when someone is in it. It's a good way to find out what the boys are hiding." The line struck like a sudden chill across the skin. Myrtle had been watching, perhaps for years. Watching boys in the bath, silently lurking beneath the surface, invisible, unseen, unnoticed. J.K. Rowling, in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, did not shy away from this moment. On the contrary, she leaned into the discomfort. Myrtle, so often dismissed as a comic nuisance, was given space to act on her desires, however unsettling they might be. The result is one of the most awkward and strange scenes in the entire series. It's not just the fact that a ghost girl is watching a teenage boy bathe, though that would be enough. It's the way it's written, the atmosphere, the invasive intimacy, the implications it carries. She's been spying on students, readers realize with a jolt. And not just Harry. Myrtle reveals that she's observed Cedric Diggory too, and that he, unlike Harry, had been kind to her. Her affection for Cedric is mentioned, but it's her fascination with Harry that becomes the focus. She admits that she was watching him when he first found the bathroom. She had been sitting in the U-bend at the time, waiting. She knew he'd come. She was waiting for him. The thought is deeply eerie. The bathroom, once a private sanctuary, becomes a place where privacy no longer exists. It is a moment that calls into question how often Myrtle has done this, and whether the other students are even aware of their ghostly spectator. It's worth noting that Harry is 14 in this scene, awkward, self-conscious, and vulnerable. He's immersed in a stressful, life-threatening competition and doesn't need the added complexity of being spied on by a ghost girl with a crush. And yet Rowling uses this discomfort to underline just how unmoored Harry feels in the magical world. Even in moments of solitude, he is never truly alone. The wizarding world, for all its wonders, often violates boundaries in ways that would be deeply troubling in the Muggle world. Myrtle is not punished for this behavior. She is not even reprimanded. Instead, she's pitied, a tragic figure, a lonely spirit desperate for attention and warmth, even if she seeks it through questionable means. This scene was quietly omitted from the film adaptation. The 2005 movie Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire did include moaning Myrtle in the bath scene, but only as comic relief. She flirts in a mild, harmless way, poking fun at Harry's modesty, and nothing more. The filmmakers carefully sidestepped the troubling undertones present in the novel. Gone was the line about watching other boys. Gone was the confession about Cedric. Gone was the sense that Myrtle had been hiding in the water all along, waiting for Harry to undress. Instead, viewers got a sanitized version, a mischievous ghost, perhaps overly attached, but never threatening, never unsettling. The sanitization is understandable. How does one portray a ghost spying on children without derailing the tone of a family-friendly film? Yet in the decision to soften the moment, the movie lost a part of what made the scene so striking. In the book, Rowling forced readers to reckon with the fact that magic does not erase human flaws, that even the dead can be intrusive, that longing, isolation, and emotional imbalance do not end with death. Myrtle was not merely mourning, she was also obsessing, watching, and intruding. There's something haunting in how Myrtle speaks of her past. She's forever trapped in adolescence, repeating cycles of rejection and invisibility. She died in that very bathroom, and her spirit never left. So she seeks relevance in the only way she knows, by involving herself in the lives of others, even when they don't ask for it. Harry becomes the object of her attention, not because he welcomes it, but because he doesn't push her away with cruelty. That small courtesy, just not being mean, becomes for Myrtle a kind of affection. It's a tragic detail, but it doesn't erase the discomfort of her behavior. The reader is left with an odd feeling, pity mixed with unease. Rowling doesn't offer easy answers. Myrtle's actions are strange, wrong even, but she's not painted as a villain. She is the product of her own tragedy. But that does not change the fact that her presence in the bath feels invasive. It's a reminder that ghosts in the Harry Potter universe are not ethereal guides or passive observers. They have emotions, desires, and sometimes they act on them in inappropriate ways. The magical world may be whimsical, but it has shadows too, many of which remain unexplored in the films. Harry's reaction in the book is subdued. He's embarrassed, annoyed, and tries to ignore Myrtle's behavior. He doesn't scold her or report her. This too says something about him. Harry is used to oddity, used to boundaries being blurred. Perhaps he doesn't even fully understand that he should be more alarmed. Or maybe he's just trying to get through the task, hoping that ignoring Myrtle will make her leave. The scene ends not with confrontation, but with resignation. Myrtle helps him interpret the egg's message, then sinks back into the water as quietly as she arrived. It is precisely this tension, the blend of usefulness and discomfort, that makes the scene so memorable. Myrtle is helping him. She is also violating his space. She is tragic. She is also intrusive. That duality, rarely shown so starkly in the rest of the series, is part of what makes the moment so strange. And yet it's not entirely out of place. The magical world is full of blurred lines, creatures that are helpful and terrifying, objects that are beautiful and dangerous, people who are kind and manipulative. Myrtle fits into this tradition, offering help and discomfort in equal measure. For readers, this moment is not easily forgotten. It lingers. It's the kind of scene that makes you question what else goes unnoticed in Hogwarts. How many other ghosts are watching? What secrets live in the walls and pipes of that ancient school? Myrtle may be alone in her confession, but surely she is not the only one with secrets. Rowling gives us a glimpse just once into this unsettling undercurrent, and then moves on, leaving the reader to fill in the blanks. In a story so often centered around heroism, sacrifice, and destiny, this one strange bathtub scene reminds us that not everything in magic is noble. Sometimes it is deeply uncomfortable. Sometimes it's the things no one talks about that stay with us the longest. And Myrtle, grinning in the bath, knowing more than she should, is one of those things. She is the ghost who wasn't just haunting Hogwarts. She was watching it intimately, invasively, and always unseen. Number 20. Petunia wanted to be a witch, Order of the Phoenix. In the dim kitchen of Privet Drive, a storm was brewing. Not outside, the sky remained deceptively calm, but within the soul of a woman who had spent her life pretending magic didn't exist. Petunia Dursley stood frozen as the word Dementor passed Harry's lips like a curse. It was as if the very air shifted, cracked, and dropped in pressure. Vernon, ever the blustering muggle, roared in confusion. Dudley whimpered. But Petunia, she was the one who changed. The moment was brief in the grand scheme of Harry's world, but in the pages of the 5th book it was monumental. It revealed something the films chose to erase, that Petunia had once longed to belong to the magical world. Petunia Evans had grown up with magic not in her blood, but in her home. Her sister, Lily, received the coveted letter. She had been whisked away to a place where portraits talked, staircases moved, and children learned to become legends. Petunia watched it all from the outside, pressed against the glass of a world that had no place for her. My sister being what she was, she got a letter just like that and disappeared off to that school and came home every holiday with her pockets full of frog spawn, turning teacups into rats. Petunia's bitterness masked a pain so old it had become calcified, layered under decades of forced normalcy and repressed yearning. In the film adaptation of Order of the Phoenix, Petunia remains an angry, narrow-eyed silhouette in the background, fussing over Dudley and scolding Harry for disrupting their life. But in the book, for a brief, aching moment, she is something more. When Harry speaks of the Dementors that attacked him and Dudley in the alley, Petunia doesn't laugh or deny it. Instead, she freezes, and a memory escapes, a name. "I heard that awful boy telling her about them years ago," she says. "Lily told me about them. Oh, it was him." That awful boy. This isn't just a frightened woman. This is a woman haunted by memories she tried desperately to forget. That awful boy! Readers know immediately she means Severus Snape. It wasn't just Lily who shared glimpses of the magical world. Snape did too. It was through him, a boy from Spinner's End, that Petunia first tasted the forbidden knowledge that had always been just beyond her reach. For all her disdain, Petunia remembered. The world of wands and spells and sorting hats had not vanished from her mind after her sister's death. She remembered it clearly, viscerally, enough to fear it, enough to hate it, enough to envy it. Jealousy had always been the root. Petunia had once written to Dumbledore, begging him to let her come to Hogwarts. She wanted to go. She was mortified that she wasn't a witch, Rowling once revealed outside the novels. This hidden history transforms Petunia from a caricature into a tragic figure. She was the child who saw her sister leave, loved and chosen, while she remained behind, plain, ordinary, forgotten. Her bitterness was never born from hatred of magic itself, but from the realization that she could never be part of it. That pain never healed. It festered and hardened into cruelty. The absence of this scene in the film strips Petunia of all complexity. On screen, she's just the shrill aunt who slams doors and insists on normalcy. But in the book, readers glimpse a woman whose life was defined by rejection. She didn't hate Lily for being magical, she hated herself for not being magical too. Every cruel word she spoke to Harry, every dismissive glance, was a reflection of the self-loathing she carried. He reminded her of what she had lost. He looked like James, yes, but he also held the same light Lily once had. A light she would never possess. It's in this moment that Petunia becomes more than a mere obstacle in Harry's path. She becomes a symbol of the forgotten, the ones who stand on the threshold of wonder and are told they do not belong. There's an ache in her sudden recollection of Dementors. Not fear alone, but familiarity. A knowing. Petunia had never seen one, but she understood them. Because in many ways she had lived like one, drained of joy, feeding on resentment, hiding from the truth of who she once wanted to be. That night, when Dumbledore's Howler arrives, shouting, "Remember my last Petunia?" she doesn't just flinch, she obeys. It is a chilling reminder that she had been in contact with Dumbledore once before. Not just as a guardian of Harry, but as a woman who once dared to beg for entry into his world. The Howler is not for Vernon or Harry, it is for Petunia. And it works. She insists Harry stay. Why? Not just because of some old warning, but because deep down part of her still believes, still fears, still feels. The filmmakers chose not to include this moment, and in doing so flattened the emotional terrain of the Dursleys' dynamic. With it, Petunia becomes static, a relic of suburban rage rather than a grieving sister. They removed the tragedy and left only the tyranny. And yet in the book, that scene lingers, it echoes, it tells us that even in the most rigid, spiteful people, there is a history of hurt, and that hurt, if explored, could change everything we think we know about them. It also reshapes how we see Lily. The sainted mother who gave her life for Harry is suddenly more human. She had a sister, and that sister adored her until jealousy made her cruel. Their bond wasn't just severed by death, but by destiny. Petunia didn't just lose Lily to Voldemort, she lost her years before to a castle she herself was never allowed to enter. This context adds a poignant dimension to the photo Harry carries of his mother, waving shyly. Somewhere beyond the frame, Petunia once stood too, but not waving, watching. By erasing this scene, the films also erased a powerful theme. That bitterness often has roots in sorrow. Petunia wasn't born spiteful. She became that way because life chose her sister instead. The magical world never meant to hurt her, but it did. And in response she tried to destroy every trace of it from her life until Harry arrived and made that impossible. She was forced to relive, day after day, the reminder of what she never had. No wonder she hated him, no wonder she feared him, no wonder she couldn't look him in the eye. Petunia's complexity could have mirrored that of other characters, Snape, for instance. Both were defined by love and rejection. Both made choices from pain. But while Snape's inner life was immortalized in Deathly Hallows, Petunia's remained buried beneath Tupperware and gossip. That choice robbed the audience of a moment that could have cracked the hardened surface of a family defined by repression. It robbed us of empathy. And it robbed Harry of something too, a glimpse into the heart of the only family he had ever known. What if that scene had stayed? What if, just once, Petunia had softened, not completely, not redemptively, but honestly? What if Harry had looked at her and seen not an enemy, but a woman who had once wanted to be him? That revelation might not have healed their bond, but it would have added gravity to their story. It would have shown that pain flows through families like a hidden current, and that even those who close their doors tight are often hiding their deepest regrets. The magic Petunia envied was never just about wands and spells. It was about love, acceptance, belonging. She never got any of it. So she clung to the opposite: control, order, silence. She married a man who hated the magical world because he made her feel safe from it. She raised a son in a bubble of mediocrity. But in her private thoughts, she remembered. She knew about dementors, she had listened at the door, she had seen Lily leave and had never truly recovered. Petunia Dursley was never meant to be a hero. But she was also never meant to be a villain. She was something far more real, a woman shaped by longing. A woman trapped in a life she never asked for, bound by jealousy she could not voice. Punished by magic she could never touch. That scene in Order of the Phoenix gave her a soul, and the films, in leaving it behind, chose spectacle over sorrow, missing the chance to remind us that even the cruelest hearts may have once hoped to fly. Number 21. Hermione smacks Ron with a book, Goblet of Fire. It happened in the Gryffindor common room, at a time when emotions had already begun to boil over between Ron and Hermione. The Triwizard Tournament had sown seeds of jealousy, pride, and confusion. Harry had been mysteriously chosen as a fourth champion, and his very presence in the competition strained his friendship with Ron. But perhaps no tension ran deeper than that between Ron and Hermione, especially after the Yule Ball and her connection with Victor Crumb. In the book Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, this strain doesn't simply manifest in long stares or biting words. It explodes, quite literally, into physical comedy. The moment Hermione takes a book and slams it over Ron's head is one of those instances that encapsulates everything raw and awkward in their growing relationship. And yet the film chose to omit it entirely. The scene is brief but vivid. Ron, as usual, lets his jealousy do the talking. He makes one too many snide comments about Victor Crumb, unable to mask his own envy under layers of sarcasm. Hermione, having had enough, takes decisive action. In the book, J.K. Rowling writes, Hermione flung her book aside, marched up to Ron, and hit him hard over the head with it. The thud of the book meeting Ron's skull is not just heard by Harry, it echoes as a symbol of how much these characters have changed. It's a moment where childish bickering finally crosses into something deeper, something more real, and more painful. This wasn't just Hermione being violent for the sake of drama. This was a culmination. For chapters, Ron had ridiculed Hermione's decision to attend the Yule Ball with Crumb. He had called her names, implied betrayal, and reduced her choices to mere provocations aimed at him. But Hermione wasn't trying to provoke Ron, she was trying to grow up. Ron couldn't see it or wouldn't see it. He had never before been forced to view Hermione as someone independent of him, someone who could be admired by others, someone who could choose. Harry, caught in the middle, is a silent witness to the unfolding drama, and through his eyes the reader feels the punch of emotion far more deeply than any director's lens could capture. When Hermione slams the book on Ron's head, it isn't just funny, it's cathartic. It's the burst of fire that comes after too much smoke. It's the slap of reality interrupting Ron's fantasy that the world and Hermione would orbit around him forever. The irony is thick in this scene. Hermione, always the rule follower, the voice of reason, the student with her hand perpetually in the air, resorts to physical violence not out of cruelty, but out of total exasperation. She has been pushed to the edge by Ron's immaturity and Harry's obliviousness. Her action is not elegant, but it's honest. And in its own way, it's heartbreaking. Because it shows that words are no longer enough. The films, with all their sweeping visuals and carefully choreographed drama, couldn't bring themselves to portray this. Instead, we get smouldering glances and subtle exchanges. Hermione shouts, Ron sulks, but the raw slapstick of emotion is lost. Maybe the filmmakers thought it was too much. Maybe they feared it would make Hermione appear unstable or Ron too pitiful. But in trying to smooth the edges, they lost the jagged truth that made these characters feel so real in the books. There's something to be said for moments of chaos in storytelling. They're not always pretty, but they're often necessary. Hermione's outburst is not a romantic gesture. It's not even particularly graceful. But it is true. For once, she doesn't calculate her reaction. She doesn't hide behind logic or timetables or color-coded schedules. She acts on emotion, deep, pent-up, bubbling emotion. And for a character like Hermione, that's revolutionary. Ron, for all his faults, takes the blow as Ron would, surprised but not hurt in spirit. He doesn't retaliate, he doesn't apologize either, he just gapes. Because for once, Hermione is not the background voice of reason, she's the storm, and Ron, the boy who so often jokes to cover up his insecurities, finds himself at the center of it. This scene also reinforces how deeply layered Hermione's character really is. She is not just the clever girl who solves puzzles and reads ahead in textbooks. She feels deeply, she breaks, she fights. And while the book on Ron's head may be made of paper, the weight behind it is all too real. It's years of being overlooked, underestimated and dismissed, not just by Ron, but by the world that sees her only as the smart one. What makes this scene particularly resonant is how relatable it feels. Many readers have experienced that boiling point, that moment when silence and sarcasm are no longer enough. When even the calmest people, those who usually carry the burden of keeping peace, snap. Hermione is that person, the one who always fixes things, always holds things together. And here she finally lets go. J.K. Rowling's decision to include this scene was no accident. It adds tension, but more than that, it adds realism. Friendships, especially those tangled with emerging feelings, are not always neat. They are messy, loud, and occasionally a little violent, not in a harmful way, but in a way that shocks the system and forces growth. Ron needed that moment. So did Hermione. It's not just about a book hitting a head, it's about a friendship and perhaps a budding romance reaching its boiling point. It's about the clumsy, painful evolution of children into adolescence. In school corridors and dormitory corners, this is how feelings often erupt. Not in tidy confessions or beautifully lit cinematography, but in awkward fights, in loud voices, and yes, sometimes in thrown books. By omitting this from the film, a layer of authenticity was peeled away. The moviegoer sees two characters inching closer, with longing glances. The reader sees them crash into each other with all the force of unspoken emotion. One version is cleaner, the other is truer. This single moment in the book captures everything messy about growing up. It doesn't apologize for the characters' flaws, it highlights them. And in doing so, it deepens our understanding of them. Hermione is not perfect. Ron is not oblivious out of malice. They are young and they are learning, and sometimes learning hurts. The sound of that book thudding against Ron's head still echoes in the minds of readers who love these characters, not because they're ideal, but because they're real. Because in their fights we remember our own. In their clumsy affections we recognize ourselves. And maybe, just maybe, that's why the scene never made it to the screen, because films seek symmetry, it wants arcs and grace. But books, they allow chaos, they allow that moment where a girl like Hermione loses her composure, and a boy like Ron realizes too late that his words have weight. And a best friend like Harry just watches, stunned, as childhood shatters just a little more. It's a shame the audience never saw it. The impact wasn't just physical, it was narrative. A book hitting a boy might sound like a punchline, but in Rowling's hands it's a turning point. And while films polished the story into something smooth and cinematic, the books kept the bruises, and that's what made them unforgettable. Number 22. Peeves drops, dung bombs, Chamber of Secrets. The second year at Hogwarts was a dark one. The corridors of the castle echoed not only with footsteps and whispers of frightened students, but with something far more chaotic. The unmistakable screech of Peeves the poltergeist in one of his most unruly moods. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, as fear began to seep into every stone and tapestry of the school, Peeves did what Peeves does best, turn panic into spectacle. As the legend of the heir of Slytherin stirred unrest and children began disappearing, most were paralyzed by dread. But not Peeves. He found in that dread a playground. He escalated from tossing chalk to unleashing his most vile invention yet, dung bombs hurled without mercy across the trembling school. J.K. Rowling painted this moment with a touch of grotesque humor. As the fear of the basilisk spread, the poltergeist seemed to thrive. Peeves the poltergeist was wreaking havoc, chucking dung bombs, pelting students with chalk, and smashing ink bottles. It was more than mayhem, it was performance art. While teachers desperately tried to keep order, Mr. Filch scuttled behind every explosion with a mop and a string of curses. Peeves danced across the ceilings and rafters, cackling madly, delighted by the terror that gripped the school. For him, chaos wasn't a byproduct, it was the goal. His mischievous glee found its perfect stage in a Hogwarts gripped by uncertainty. And yet none of this made it into the film adaptation. Nowhere in the Chamber of Secrets movie is there the pandemonium of students raising umbrellas inside corridors to shield themselves from airborne filth. Nowhere is the image of Professor McGonagall muttering cleaning charms while trying to maintain order as Peeves zips past in hysterics. This omission is not a minor one. It strips the castle of a layer of anarchic personality. Without Peeves, Hogwarts loses a part of its soul. Not the noble or wise part, but the loud, vulgar, rebellious part that makes the school feel alive. The idea of children shielding themselves with umbrellas indoors seems absurd, and that's exactly what makes it so perfect. Hogwarts has always been a place where logic bends under the weight of enchantment. Adding mundane objects like umbrellas to magical scenarios creates a delightful absurdity. It's not enough that students fear being petrified, they also have to worry about being pelted with dung bombs during breakfast. Peeves was always excellent at finding the precise boundary between nuisance and horror, and then tap dancing over it. One cannot underestimate the symbolic power of Peeves's dung bombs during this time. The students were terrified, unsure of who might be attacked next. Rumors about Harry being the heir of Slytherin circulated in hushed tones. The very walls of the school whispered betrayal. Amid this psychological siege, Peeves chose not to cower. He chose to mock it. His bombings weren't just pranks, they were anti-establishment declarations. He reminded everyone that fear, no matter how serious, could still be ridiculed. In his own twisted way, he was telling the castle not to let the fear win. This episode also gives us a deeper look into the unspoken alliance between Hogwarts' staff and Peeves. He wasn't a creature they liked, but he was a creature they tolerated. In this moment, however, tolerance reached a breaking point. Filch, already overwhelmed by the waterlogged messes of a certain ghost and the shattered nerves of students, was now dealing with excrement-splattered corridors. His rage was palpable. "I'll have him banned! I'll get the bloody Baron!" he screeched. But even the bloody Baron, Peeves's only true authority figure, had withdrawn into spectral silence during the panic. The scene is a missed cinematic gem. Imagine it. The somber atmosphere of the film version of the Chamber of Secrets is suddenly shattered by shrieks, splatters, and utter absurdity. A slow camera pan reveals Ron Weasley covering his breakfast with a plate as something brown lands with a squish beside his pumpkin juice. Hermione, always so poised, casting Scourgify over and over again while shooting furious glances at the ceiling, even Draco Malfoy ducking a foul-smelling projectile mid-insult. It would have been an unforgettable contrast, a much-needed comic interlude in an otherwise brooding story. Kenneth Branagh's Gilderoy Lockhart would have had a particularly interesting reaction. Known for his vanity and obsession with cleanliness, his reaction to a mid-lesson bombing could have been a moment of true comedic gold. In the book, Lockhart is revealed as a fraud. In this scene, he could have been literally humiliated, drenched in Peeves's excremental fireworks, flailing and shrieking about ruined robes and endangered hair. It would have further humanized the student's ordeal and underscored the idea that no one, not even the pompous, was safe from the chaos. More than just comic relief, this moment with Peeves is a character study. Rowling didn't insert him randomly. He is the embodiment of rebellion without cause. While the basilisk slithered through pipes with deadly intent, Peeves soared through the air with juvenile malice. In a strange way, he kept the school from going completely dark. His laughter, crude as it was, reminded readers that Hogwarts still had noise, colour, and vitality. Fear hadn't swallowed everything yet. He was a vulgar candle in an ever-darkening hallway. Leaving Peeves out of the films means the audience never gets to witness this balance. The tone of the movies shifted towards solemnity, especially from the second film onward. Without Peeves's unchecked madness, there's a sterile neatness to Hogwarts that never existed in the books. The grit, the grime, the unapologetic mess, all the things that made the school feel real and lived in, were smoothed away in favor of cinematic polish. A polished Hogwarts is a less magical Hogwarts. What makes the exclusion even more baffling is that Peeves was cast. British comedian Rick Mayall, a legend in anarchic comedy, had been chosen to play the poltergeist. He filmed scenes, he wore the costume, and then he was cut entirely. His footage never saw the light of day. His performance, according to him, was too silly for the tone they wanted. And that is the tragedy. That the very essence of Peeves, his unapologetic, inappropriate, ridiculous presence, was deemed incompatible with the filmmaker's vision. By cutting Peeves, the film sanitized a story that was never meant to be tidy. Hogwarts, like its students, was full of contradictions, grand feasts and dung bombs, illuminated ceilings and leaky toilets, professors with secrets and ghosts with grudges. Peeves was part of that fabric, one thread in the patchwork quilt that made the castle feel like a living organism. With him gone, the movies felt more like a postcard than a lived-in place. What's more, Peeves represented a kind of resistance, not against Voldemort, but against structure, authority, and pretense. He was there to mock the solemn, to disrupt the ordered. He couldn't be reasoned with or predicted. He was magical chaos incarnate. In a castle governed by rules, he was the living exception. The students may have feared the basilisk, but they expected Peeves. They understood him. He was part of their normal, and in times of terror, normal becomes sacred. There's a unique sadness in knowing that generations of film-only fans will never meet him. They'll never roll their eyes at his awful rhymes or duck under his floating pewter jugs. They'll never hear his maniacal laugh echo through the stone halls or see the despair on Filch's face when a dung bomb explodes under his feet. The absence is glaring for those who know where to look. The films may be beautiful, but they are missing the grime. They are missing Peeves. Perhaps that's the heart of it. In the Chamber of Secrets, when everything began to fall apart, when the walls seemed to whisper and friends turned into suspects, the books reminded us that absurdity still had a place, that even in the darkest chapters, chaos could wear a jester's grin. And in a rain of dung bombs and echoing cackles, Rowling gave us that absurdity. She gave us Peeves. The films, sadly, did not. Number 23. Harry yells at Professor McGonagall, Order of the Phoenix, in the shadows of the ever-watchful walls of Hogwarts, where portraits whispered and staircases creaked with secrets. Something rare unfolded during Harry Potter's 5th year. The usual rhythm of discipline and respect between student and teacher faltered, revealing a raw, human crack in the magical fabric that held their world together. Professor McGonagall, the unshakable deputy headmistress, had always been a figure of stern grace, someone Harry Potter respected deeply, not just because of her authority, but because of her unwavering fairness. But stress, grief, and injustice do not ask for permission before they twist even the strongest bonds. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, one overlooked scene, cut from the film entirely, shows Harry lashing out at McGonagall in a way that makes readers wince. It is a moment that reveals more about Harry's emotional unraveling than any of his brooding silences or shouted arguments. Yet in the movie adaptation, this scene is absent, erased, in favor of pacing, losing its subtle but powerful commentary on teenage fury and adult restraint. When Harry bursts into Professor McGonagall's office after another disastrous run-in with Dolores Umbridge, his emotions are no longer contained. He has spent months being gaslighted by the Ministry, punished for telling the truth, watched with suspicion, and watched others suffer under the thumb of an oppressive regime. Sirius Black, his last true family, is in danger. His dreams are not just dreams, they are connections to the dark, coiling thoughts of Lord Voldemort himself. And Harry, a boy only 15, is shouldering it alone. The very school meant to protect him has become a place of surveillance and silent fear. When he storms in, the atmosphere is heavy with rage and desperation. McGonagall, trying to assert calm and offer guidance, tells him plainly to control himself. But Harry doesn't. For the first time, he directs his fury not at Umbridge, not at Snape, not at the world, but at her. The words leap off the page like a hex. Well, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to sit on my backside and do nothing while someone else suffers, Harry snaps. It's a stinging accusation suggesting cowardice or complicity. From anyone, this would be a sharp rebuke. From Harry Potter, whom McGonagall has shielded, disciplined, and, in her own quiet way, nurtured, it cuts deeper. The book captures a flicker of emotion in McGonagall's expression, a moment where the reader can see the wound without it being named. She doesn't retaliate, she doesn't dock points or assign detention, she simply looks at him with something akin to pain. Her silence, as described in the text, says more than a reprimand ever could. This is not just a scene of conflict, it is a turning point. Until now, Harry's rebelliousness has largely been framed as righteous. His anger at Umbridge is understandable. His impatience with the Ministry is justifiable. But here, Rowling introduces the idea that righteous anger, when unchecked, can burn bridges instead of lighting the way. McGonagall is not the enemy. She is one of the few allies Harry still has at Hogwarts, and in lashing out, he nearly alienates her. The emotional cost is immediate. As readers, we feel McGonagall's hurt, her restraint, and Harry's rawness. It's a moment of uncomfortable realism, the kind of moment teenagers and adults alike recognize in hindsight as a mistake made under pressure. This pivotal scene is nowhere to be found in Order of the Phoenix, the movie. The film paints McGonagall as a stern observer, occasionally quipping, often frowning, but mostly removed from the narrative's emotional center. Her conflict with Umbridge is present. Yes, she defends students, challenges unfair policies, even stands tall after being hit with multiple stunning spells. But her relationship with Harry remains untouched, never tested, never deepened. By removing this confrontation, the film misses a chance to show how stress distorts even the most stable dynamics. It loses the opportunity to explore the cost of leadership on both sides of the age divide. There is power in how Rowling constructs the scene in the book. McGonagall doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't meet fire with fire. Instead, she absorbs Harry's rage with a painful dignity. This is the behavior of a true teacher, not perfect, not infallible, but wise enough to know when punishment would do more harm than good. It's an echo of something Dumbledore himself might have done. She sees past the insult and understands the storm behind it, and that in itself makes Harry's behavior all the more cutting, because in that moment he isn't just angry, he's lost and striking at the very hands reaching to steady him. It also tells us something profound about McGonagall. Often portrayed as the disciplinarian in the series, her emotional depth is rarely acknowledged. This scene offers a glimpse into her compassion, her ability to endure pain in silence for the sake of a child she's sworn to protect. The fact that she lets the moment pass without a word of scolding is not weakness, it is strength, and it leaves readers with an ache that lingers. This is not just about Harry's pain, it is about the quiet sacrifices of adults who hold themselves together while children fall apart. For Harry, the scene is a mirror. He sees in McGonagall's silence the consequences of his outburst. It is not a dramatic revelation, not a shouted apology, but a recognition. And that recognition begins to shape the way he carries himself later. It is a small seed of emotional growth, one that begins with guilt, not instruction. That moment, removed from the visual canon of the films, represents one of the truest coming-of-age beats in the entire book series. Not every lesson is taught through lectures. Some are learned in silence, through the looks we cannot forget and the words we cannot take back. The scene also reframes our understanding of what it means to be brave. Gryffindor bravery is usually loud, defiant, action-driven. But here, the bravery belongs to McGonagall. She endures a personal blow from someone she deeply cares about, and she responds not with authority, but with restraint. Her stillness is a kind of heroism that the films never quite capture. And in omitting the scene, the adaptation simplifies her character, reducing her to a caricature of strictness rather than a fully realized protector. For all its grandeur and spectacle, the Order of the Phoenix film struggles with emotional nuance. It captures the rebellion, the battle, the chaos, but it skips over the quiet tragedies, the moments where relationships fracture and rebuild in invisible ways. Harry's relationship with McGonagall is not central to the plot, but it is essential to the heart of the story. Their clash and her response represents a crucial exploration of intergenerational trust, the burdens of expectation, and the pain of misdirected emotion. Without it, Harry's rage feels less justified and McGonagall's loyalty feels less earned. There is something profoundly human in the way this scene unfolds in the book. It doesn't offer easy answers. McGonagall doesn't explain herself. Harry doesn't apologize. Life continues, as it often does after a rupture, with wounds left to scab over unseen. But readers remember, because in that single moment, Rowling captures the fragile balance between student and mentor, the damage that words can do, and the grace it takes not to answer pain with punishment. This missing scene reminds us that magic is not just spells and duels. Sometimes the most powerful magic is in how people choose to respond to hurt. McGonagall's silence is a spell of protection, cast not with a wand but with her heart. She shields Harry not from danger but from himself. And that protection, unacknowledged and unrewarded, may be the truest act of courage in the entire book. By stripping the story of this interaction, the film leaves us with a flatter version of Harry's emotional journey. We see him angry, yes, but we miss the depth of his alienation. We see him lead Dumbledore's army, but we don't fully grasp the toll of isolation. We are shown his victories, but not the cost. And without that cost, the stakes feel lighter, the triumphs smaller. The book gives us a Harry who makes mistakes, who lashes out at the wrong people, and who must live with that. The movie gives us a hero streamlined for efficiency. In the end, it is not just about what the scene reveals about Harry. It's about what it reveals about the adults around him. McGonagall's dignity, her quiet compassion, her understanding, these are not dramatic traits, but they are vital. And their absence in the film adaptation is felt, even if unconsciously. Because the emotional architecture of Harry Potter isn't built solely on epic battles and chosen one speeches. It's built on moments like this, small, painful and true, moments where people disappoint each other and somehow choose to forgive. Number 24. Harry burns. His friend's letters. Order of the Phoenix. In the suffocating silence of number 4, Privet Drive, a different kind of darkness began to settle over Harry Potter. It wasn't the kind of darkness bred by Dementors or Death Eaters, but the insidious, internal kind loneliness that pressed like wet wool against the skin. The 5th book, Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, was never gentle. It dug into the emotional marrow of a boy already scarred by tragedy and demanded more from him than ever before. Harry, newly returned from the Triwizard Tournament and the graveyard horrors that claimed Cedric Diggory's life, found himself shackled in an invisible prison of silence. The Ministry denied the truth. The Dursleys offered no comfort, and the Order, for all its whispered power, kept him in the dark. The boy who had once been the chosen one now stood utterly isolated, furious, confused, and emotionally starved. From the earliest pages of the book, Harry's rage begins to simmer. He patrols the neighborhood in search of answers, desperate for meaning, for action, for a sign that someone somewhere still remembers what he lived through. The letters he does receive from Ron and Hermione are little more than breadcrumbs, vague reassurances that everything is fine, that he must trust Dumbledore, and that they can't say much more in a letter. This deliberate vagueness is what finally cracks him. Instead of comfort, the words feel like condescension. Harry, who has risked his life again and again, is now being told to sit still and behave. His friends, though well-meaning, have become messengers of Dumbledore's strategy, one of omission, silence, and protection. And so the boy who once faced down a mountain troll and stood against Voldemort does something shocking in its immaturity. He throws their letters into the fireplace. It's a brief moment in the book, barely noticed by some readers, yet profoundly revealing. He seized the parchment Ron had sent him and crumpled it into a ball. Then he seized Hermione's. They followed Hedwig's empty cage into the fireplace, the text recounts coldly. These aren't just scraps of paper, they are offerings from his oldest and closest friends, physical symbols of connection, and he tosses them into the fire like trash. The act is not just symbolic of rejection, it is almost ritualistic in its fury. He is not simply angry at Ron and Hermione, he is trying to sever something, trying to take control of a life spiraling beyond his reach. This scene never made it into the movie, and perhaps that was a deliberate choice. The films, though occasionally brave, often softened Harry's rougher edges, as if fearful that audiences would reject a hero who dared to be truly human. The angry, sulking, irritable teenager of the 5th book was sanded down for the screen. We see glimpses of frustration, a few shouting matches, a furrowed brow, but never the raw combustion that Joe Rowling allowed to erupt across the pages. The act of burning letters, of destroying the very symbols of friendship, was deemed too dark, too petty, too unheroic. But it is precisely this pettiness that makes the scene powerful. Harry's actions in that moment are childish, yes, but they are also painfully real. He lashes out not because he has become cruel, but because he feels abandoned. He is trapped in a house where no one speaks his name with kindness, where memories of Cedric and prophecies and graveyards fester with no outlet. And the people who should know him best, Ron and Hermione, have become distant echoes, hiding behind vague pleasantries. Their letters meant to comfort become fuel for his despair. It's not the only moment in Order of the Phoenix where Harry behaves in a way that shatters the neat narrative of the flawless hero. He yells at Dumbledore, he snaps at Hermione, he accuses Ron of not understanding, but the letter-burning moment is unique because it is silent. There's no argument, no witness, no cathartic shouting. It's a private moment of destruction, and in that privacy Harry's loneliness is laid bare. He is not performing rage. He is living inside it. When viewed in isolation, the act may seem petty. Why burn letters that could offer some hope, however faint? But this is precisely the emotional chaos that Rowling was brave enough to explore. Harry does not want hope filtered through caution. He wants truth. The vague promises of "you'll understand soon" or "Dumbledore says to wait" ring hollow, and so he reduces them to ash. In the flicker of that flame, we see the boy who no longer wants to be protected, who resents the world for deciding he is too fragile to hear it. This is a Harry Potter, rarely acknowledged, not just brave, but broken, not just strong, but brittle. The films understandably lean into his nobility, his courage, his resilience, but the books dared to show something harder to love, the boy trembling under the weight of survival. It is uncomfortable to watch a hero collapse. Yet it is this collapse that makes his later choices to lead Dumbledore's army, to confront Umbridge, to walk into the Forbidden Forest, feel truly earned. There's a reason this scene is remembered by readers who felt the book cut deeper than the others. Order of the Phoenix is not about external threats, it is about internal war, the mind, the heart, the soul, all under siege. And Rowling allowed Harry to descend into a place that many teenagers will recognize, a space where anger feels like the only way to stay afloat, where even friendship feels like an intrusion. His rejection of Ron and Hermione's letters is not just an act of rage, it is a cry of protest against being kept in the dark, a demand to be seen, heard, understood. It's also a turning point. Soon after, Harry is brought to number 12, Grimmauld Place, where he is finally allowed to rejoin the magical world. The fire of his anger does not vanish, but it finds purpose. His friends remain by his side. The Order becomes real. The war begins to take shape. But the moment at the Dursleys, the crumpled parchment, the fall into flame, marks the nadir of Harry's emotional arc. From there, he can rise, but only because he has first allowed himself to fall. The scene may have been omitted from the film to preserve Harry's image, but that omission came at a cost. Without it, the viewer loses a piece of his emotional journey, the depth of his pain, the extent of his alienation. The visual of letters curling into ash would have said more than dialogue ever could. It would have shown a boy unraveling, and in time choosing to stitch himself back together. There is poetry in the fact that the fire that consumed his friends' words also illuminates his own brokenness. In burning their letters, he does not erase them. He invites their ghosts to haunt him. He invites his own guilt. And guilt, as Order of the Phoenix so masterfully shows, is often the seed from which resolve grows. The Harry who leads a rebellion at Hogwarts is not the same boy who burned those letters. He is someone who has seen the edge of himself and chosen to return. That is what makes this scene so vital. It is not about anger alone. It is about the terrible clarity that sometimes only destruction can bring. The fire in the hearth that summer was not just a tantrum. It was a funeral for the illusion that Harry could still be the boy he was before. Cedric, was dead, Voldemort was back, and the world, once filled with secrets and adventure, now reeked of politics, surveillance, and betrayal. The letters burned because they belonged to a world that no longer made sense, and yet even in his fury, Harry does not sever the bonds completely. When he is finally reunited with Ron and Hermione, the friendship endures. They do not hold his silence against him. They forgive his distance, and perhaps that more than anything is the quiet triumph of Order of the Phoenix. That even when he burns the only bridges he thinks he has left, the people on the other side keep waiting for him to return. Number 25. Hagrid's giant brother, Order of the Phoenix. In the dense heart of the forbidden forest where centaurs roamed and the trees whispered secrets older than Hogwarts itself, Hagrid kept a secret of his own. Not a niffler or a tame thestral, not even a pet acromantula like the infamous Aragog. This time it was something far more bizarre, far more dangerous, and far more impossible to explain to any reasonable adult. His name was Grawp. He stood 16 feet tall, had a head disproportionately small for his hulking body, and sported a face so craggy and wild that birds would flee when he roared at the sky. He was, Hagrid explained, his half-brother. The absurdity of that fact alone could be enough to make any reader pause. But what truly made this entire subplot in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix so bewildering was not the existence of Grawp, but the way the story around him was told, managed, and then forgotten. Hagrid, ever the misfit caretaker of all things monstrous, revealed to Harry, Hermione, and Ron that during his months-long disappearance, while supposedly recruiting the giants to Dumbledore's cause, he had come across Grawp, a runt by giant standards. Hagrid, feeling a familial obligation, decided the best course of action was to forcibly remove Grawp from his homeland and drag him, under threat and sedatives, into the very forest surrounding a school for children. It is worth repeating, Hagrid chained a 16-foot-tall wild giant to a tree in a school-adjacent forest, in secret, and then tried to raise him like a toddler. The books described it earnestly, without irony, as Hagrid explained, "I couldn't just leave him. See, he's me, brother." From that moment on, the reader is plunged into a surreal, almost slapstick sequence of events that defies logic and undercuts the tension of the larger narrative. We are told that Grawp doesn't speak English, becomes violently aggressive when approached, and yet Hagrid visits him regularly, bringing him dead animals to eat and trying to teach him to say Hermy and Hagger. Grawp, confused and furious, often throws entire trees in frustration and at one point seems ready to crush Hermione like a doll. It is as though J.K. Rowling inserted a wild, uncontrollable beast into the middle of a war novel and expected readers to treat it with warmth and humour. The tonal mismatch is staggering. Even in the magical world where sentient hats and soul-sucking wraiths are par for the course, Grawp's entire existence raises far too many uncomfortable questions. What was Hagrid thinking? How did he get Grawp into the forest without anyone noticing? How did he manage to chain a giant to a tree without being crushed in the process? What was the long-term plan here? The answer is never really given. Instead, the plot is pushed forward as though Grawp is just another one of Hagrid's quirky habits, like crossbreeding blast-ended scroots or raising fire-breathing dogs. The film adaptation wisely sidestepped the majority of this subplot. Grawp appears briefly in one scene, more as a background curiosity than a narrative turning point. The filmmakers, perhaps aware of how tonally disruptive Grawp's story was, chose not to dwell on it. They had good reason. How does one translate onto the screen a scene where a massive creature is chained to a tree, wailing for attention, and the supposed hero of that situation is the one who imprisoned him? In a visual medium, the absurdity becomes even more glaring. The audience might not laugh, they might feel uncomfortable. and perhaps that's why Grawp was largely erased from the cinematic version. Yet in the book, Rowling committed to the bit. She doubled down on the relationship between Hagrid and Grawp, portraying it with a strange tenderness that never quite lands. There's a moment where Hagrid beams with pride because Grawp has learned not to crush people when they visit, as though that's a step in the right direction. "You don't try and kill me so often anymore," Hagrid says proudly. The absurdity of that line, spoken without sarcasm, demonstrates just how far into fantasy the narrative had drifted. This is not a story about magical realism anymore. It's a surrealist dream in which child endangerment is overlooked because of brotherly love. But even stranger is the moment later in the book when Grawp is used as a kind of plot device to get the students out of danger. When Hagrid is sacked and Umbridge takes over, Grawp is left alone in the forest, angrier than ever, but not before being told to protect Hermione. This decision that a violent semi-feral giant should be tasked with the protection of teenagers defies all sense. And yet Grawp comes through in the end, causing chaos that helps the students escape. It's presented as a moment of growth, of triumph, but one can't help but wonder, was this ever really earned, or was it simply written to justify Grawp's existence? There is something deeply uncomfortable about the way Grawp's storyline attempts to humanize an uncontrollable threat. Readers are asked to sympathize with a being whose only notable interactions involve screaming, breaking things, and terrifying children. The juxtaposition of Hagrid's love and Grawp's dangerous unpredictability never reconciles itself. It's not a tale of brotherly redemption. It's a series of barely connected scenes with a looming threat that never fully materializes nor resolves. What's more, the subplot derails the pacing of the book. Order of the Phoenix is already the longest installment in the series, packed with political intrigue, emotional trauma, and looming war. Against the backdrop of Umbridge's rise to power, Dumbledore's evasiveness, and Harry's growing anger and isolation, the sudden insertion of a giant in the forest feels out of place. One moment, Harry is plagued by nightmares and existential dread. The next, he's standing before a chained beast, watching it roar at squirrels. Characters like Hermione, usually the voice of reason, seem unusually subdued in their reaction. She voices concern, but ultimately accepts the situation with far too little protest. One would expect more than a raised eyebrow when a beloved professor introduces an illegal, potentially murderous creature into their daily proximity. But even the trio seems to understand that Grawp, however implausible, is now part of the narrative, logic be damned. The scenes involving Grawp also dilute the emotional weight of the later chapters. When Sirius dies and the students return to a shaken Hogwarts, the reader is left with a strange assortment of dangling plot threads, Grawp among them. He does not grieve, reflect, or evolve. He simply vanishes into the forest. Another loose end tied up with a passing sentence. There's no catharsis, no deeper meaning, just a very large creature that briefly appeared and then wandered away. Even Dumbledore's reaction is baffling. The headmaster, who interferes with nearly everything, says nothing about the presence of a giant in his backyard. It stretches credibility. Would a man so concerned with the safety of his students truly allow this? The book offers no explanation. The oversight is never addressed. Grawp's presence is simply accepted. Perhaps the strangest part of all is that Hagrid, whose heart is often in the right place, shows such poor judgment. His actions regarding Grawp are not only reckless, they're deeply selfish. He never asks whether Grawp wants to be there. He never considers the danger to others. He simply decides that familial loyalty justifies all. And while this may serve to deepen Hagrid's character in a certain light, it also reveals his greatest flaw, a tendency to project his own desires onto creatures incapable of understanding them. The entire Grawp subplot feels like a fever dream, a sequence that, once finished, leaves the reader blinking in confusion. Did that really happen? Was there truly a giant chained to a tree for months, fed rabbits by hand, and taught to speak in baby talk? And did this all take place with almost no consequence? In the world of Harry Potter, where every subplot usually ties back into the greater tapestry, Grawp stands as an anomaly. Not crucial to the plot, not particularly symbolic, just present. A forgotten branch in an otherwise carefully pruned tree. The filmmakers, perhaps wisely, decided not to let that branch grow. And so, Grawp remains one of the most bizarre detours in the series, a moment where the suspension of disbelief snaps and readers are left to wonder if even J.K. Rowling questioned what she had created. In the end, he fades into the forest. His only legacy, a handful of scenes and a giant question mark. Number 26, Professor Trelawney, drinks on duty, half-blood prince. In the dimly lit corridors of Hogwarts, where shadows play tricks and secrets linger in the very stones, one woman stumbles not from the weight of prophecy but from something far more human. Sybil Trelawney, the divination professor, cloaked in scarves and the scent of incense, drifts through the halls not as a seer this time, but as a figure unravelling at the seams. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, she transforms from a background eccentric to a tragicomic spectacle, one that the film adaptation never dared to portray. It begins innocently enough during the Christmas season, when the castle glows with enchanted snow and laughter echoes through stone archways. But Sybil is not among those rejoicing in the great hall. Instead, she skulks alone, gripping a bottle of sherry beneath her many shawls, whispering about auras and omens as she ascends the spiralling stairs. The book spares no detail. She isn't merely eccentric, she is visibly intoxicated, bitter and fragile. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, one underscore, underscore. She murmurs to Harry, who finds her loitering around the room of requirement. I am not wanted, I know that. Dumbledore doesn't need me anymore. This is not the whimsical Trelawney of the earlier films, swathed in mystery and comic detachment. This is a woman unravelling. Her eyes, usually wide with mock vision, now shine with something closer to desperation. She confesses to Harry that her attempts to conduct classes in the room of requirement have been foiled. Something or someone has been pushing her out. She clutches her sherry tighter, as though it were the only object in the castle still loyal to her. Her suspicion doesn't come from nowhere. She is being squeezed out, and she knows it. Firenze, the centaur who replaced her during her dismissal in Order of the Phoenix, now shares her post. The humiliation gnaws at her pride. Though Dumbledore reinstated her, he did not remove Firenze. She walks the castle in a haze of perfume and drink, muttering about betrayal and bad vibrations. Her talents may be flimsy, her predictions often ridiculous, but her emotions are painfully real. The film version chose to ignore this entirely, erasing the breakdown of Trelawney in favour of preserving her mystique. But the most striking moment arrives not in hushed conversation or quiet corridors, but in a public collapse. In Chapter 25, The Seer Overheard, Trelawney becomes a spectacle. She tells Harry, quite unprompted, about her recurring misfortune. I often find myself not welcome, she says with indignation and a slur. I was walking past the room of requirement, hoping for a quiet place to meditate, when it expelled me. Her drunken ramblings don't simply add colour, they reveal something far darker beneath her eccentricity. The despair of a woman clinging to the last shreds of respect in a castle that no longer values her. She is so drunk she cannot keep her balance, dropping her deck of tarot cards all over the corridor floor. As Harry stoops to help her pick them up, she rants about hostile auras and students who mock her gift. The cards scatter like fallen feathers, ironic symbols of a future she can no longer see clearly. Her dishevelment is not funny, it's heartbreaking. The absurdity of a teacher so publicly intoxicated, so thoroughly unraveling, would have made a sharp and uncomfortable addition to the film's polished tone. But perhaps it was too raw for the screen. Dumbledore, usually patient with even the most eccentric staff members, shows rare sternness when she interrupts his meeting later. He listens, nods with an air of forced calm, then suggests gently that perhaps she might lie down for a while. His voice is soft, but the message is clear. For all her years at Hogwarts, for all her cloying devotion to prophecy, Trelawney is no longer needed, not really. The truth lands like a slap. It is a deeply human moment, a woman who once held court in her perfumed tower, now reduced to muttering in corridors and nursing a sherry bottle like a talisman. The film adaptation entirely avoids this unraveling. Emma Thompson's portrayal of Trelawney remains in the realm of the comically vague and harmless, never veering into the territory of despair or breakdown. She floats into scenes with her wide eyes and layered shawls, but we never see the alcohol, never hear the slurred bitterness in her voice, never feel the sting of her rejection. Her eccentricity remains polished, acceptable, even charming. But in doing so, the films rob her character of its most revealing moment. Rowling's decision to include such a scene in the book was deliberate. It serves as a mirror to the chaos brewing in the world beyond the castle walls. Even within Hogwarts, the safe haven, the adults are cracking. The war is not only affecting students like Harry and Draco, it seeps into every corner of the castle. Trelawney's descent is symbolic of a broader collapse, the fraying edges of a community stretched too thin. Her drunken, stumbling and paranoid mutterings might seem absurd, but they are also painfully honest. She is a casualty of the tension and uncertainty that plague the wizarding world. There's also a biting irony in her situation. Trelawney, for all her false predictions and theatrical flair, once delivered one of the most important prophecies in wizarding history. It was she who foretold the downfall of Lord Voldemort. But she doesn't know it. She doesn't remember the words she spoke that night at the Hog's Head. And now, reduced to this pitiful figure, she is no longer even trusted to lead a classroom without supervision. Her one true moment of vision remains a mystery to her, and that unknowing adds a tragic layer to her character. Imagine, for a moment, if the film had captured her in this state, drunk, indignant, and collapsing beneath the weight of rejection. It would have been a scene filled with painful humor, the kind that reveals character through contradiction, a seer who can't see her own decline, a professor too proud to admit she has become irrelevant. It would have lent depth to a figure who too often serves as mere comic relief. The image of her clutching a bottle of sherry in the corridor, sobbing about unseen enemies and misread auras, is one of the most humanizing moments she has ever given. It also deepens our understanding of Dumbledore. His reaction to her behavior is restrained, but it reveals his limits. He is compassionate, yes, but he is also burdened. There are more important battles to fight, more dangerous truths to uncover. He cannot afford to coddle Trelawney. In asking her to rest, he is gently removing her from the equation. The war is escalating, and not everyone is equipped to be part of it. Trelawney, with her sherry-soaked visions and trembling indignation, is one of those left behind. The hallway scene, when reread, holds a tragic rhythm. The clinking of the bottle, the shuffle of her worn shoes, the tremble in her voice. These are not the tools of a prophet. They are the signs of a woman who has lost her place in the world. Her loneliness is stark. Firenze, her silent rival, teaches his classes in the glow of starlight and speaks in riddles that sound profound. Trelawney, by contrast, teaches in a stuffy tower filled with incense and self-delusion. She knows she's losing, she's just too proud to admit it outright. There's also something deeply British about this brand of breakdown, quietly tragic, cloaked in politeness, and fueled by alcohol. Trelawney doesn't scream or rage. She laments, stumbles, and clings to rituals that no longer mean anything. Her dignity is peeled away layer by layer, until all that remains is a woman who once believed she had power, now reduced to whispering omens into the dark. And the students pass her by, some snickering, others ignoring her completely. The invisibility of her pain is what cuts deepest. That's the scene the film chose to omit, not out of oversight, but out of discomfort. It's easier to keep Trelawney in the realm of the amusing, the curious, the safe. But the books never promised safety, they promised truth. And the truth about Sybil Trelawney is that she is more than comic relief. She is a discarded relic of a magical world that is changing too fast for her to follow. And in the corridor, drunk and muttering, she knows it. The bottle in her hand is not just a prop, it's a symbol of resignation, of sorrow, of a future she didn't predict and cannot escape. Number 27. Percy's cruel letter to his parents. Order of the Phoenix, oh Percy, in the swirl of war, rebellion, and teenage defiance that fills Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. Few moments cut quite so deeply as the moment Percy Weasley turns his back on his family. It's not simply a disagreement, nor is it a matter of hurt feelings that will heal with time. It's a deliberate, strategic severing. In the book, Rowling does not flinch in portraying Percy as a young man who chooses ambition over kinship, authority over truth, and in doing so wounds the people who love him most. He sends a letter, a brutal, impersonal, formal letter, to his own parents, warning them against their beliefs and suggesting they are lost. It's a painful scene, almost too painful, and so it's not entirely surprising that the film adaptation chose to leave it out. But in doing so, the movie loses something vital, the truth that sometimes the real battle isn't just between good and evil, but between people who once sat at the same dinner table. Percy Weasley had always been the rule follower of the Weasley clan. He valued order, control, and above all, the structure of authority. He didn't just obey rules, he worshipped them. Where Fred and George threw dung bombs and Ron chased after flying cars, Percy polished his prefect badge and practiced signing his name in cursive for ministry memos. It was clear early on that Percy was cut from a different cloth, but no one, not even Molly or Arthur, could have predicted the depth of his betrayal. In Order of the Phoenix, Rowling doesn't offer the reader a dramatic confrontation with yelling or broken dishes. Instead, we get the quiet horror of a letter. That's all it takes. The letter arrives as a bombshell. It is not warm, not apologetic. It is clinical and cold, addressed to Ron, but meant for the entire family. Percy writes, "I sincerely hope that in time they will realize how mistaken they have been." He refers to his parents, the same people who knitted him sweaters, made him tea, and celebrated his first job at the ministry with a cake. Now they are simply mistaken. It's the language of bureaucracy, not brotherhood, and it stings. Worse, Percy urges Ron to distance himself from Harry, calling Harry unstable, and heavily implies that Dumbledore is not to be trusted. The ministry line becomes his gospel. For Ron, the betrayal is crushing. This isn't a schoolmate turning his back or a stranger spreading rumors. This is his brother, someone who grew up in the same cluttered, love-filled house, now suggesting that his family is wrong, deluded even. And to add salt to the wound, Percy doesn't come himself. He doesn't speak these words in person. He sends them in ink, wrapped in the tight, suffocating language of officialdom. It is the kind of betrayal that doesn't explode, it corrodes, slowly and bitterly. The emotional impact on the Weasley family is left mostly unspoken, but it's there. Molly Weasley, usually the warmest presence in any room, becomes tense whenever Percy is mentioned. There are scenes in the book where she fights back tears, her hands trembling as she pretends to busy herself in the kitchen. She tries to hide her heartbreak, but it seeps into her voice, her posture, her silences. Arthur, ever the pacifist, avoids confrontation, but even he cannot bring himself to defend Percy's actions. The family is quietly fractured, and everyone feels it, especially during Christmas, when there's an empty chair at the table and no one dares speak his name. In the films, however, this rift is non-existent. Percy becomes a background figure, a blur of red hair in a ministry robe. There's no letter, no tension, no turning point. The complexity of his decision and the real-world echo of choosing institutional loyalty over familial bonds is lost. The audience sees a family united against a common enemy, not one partially torn from within. And that perhaps is the greatest loss of all. Because Percy's betrayal was not just about politics, it was about the very human fear of being wrong and the even greater fear of admitting it. Percy's choice to stand with the ministry was not made in malice, but in fear. He believed that siding with the official narrative would protect him, validate him. He saw Dumbledore as a dangerous maverick and Harry as an unstable child spreading panic. He chose what looked like safety and credibility over the messy, frightening truth. That's what makes his letter so painful, not just that it betrays his family, but that it shows how deeply he's been consumed by denial. He isn't pretending, he believes what he writes. And that belief becomes a wedge that separates him from everyone he once loved. This kind of storyline, the slow unraveling of family through ideology, is deeply relatable. It happens in real life every day. Children grow up and choose different paths. Political lines are drawn, and suddenly the people we once knew become strangers. Rowling captured this painful reality with astonishing precision. The letter is a symbol, a quiet act of war, and by excluding it, the films miss a key thematic thread that even among the good guys there is fracture, there is heartbreak, and there are consequences for every choice. What's particularly striking is how Rowling juxtaposes Percy's letter with other scenes of loyalty and rebellion. At the same time, Percy is writing off his parents. Harry is forming Dumbledore's army. While Percy warns Ron to avoid Harry, Ron to avoid. Ginny is standing shoulder to shoulder with him. The contrast is stark. Some members of the younger generation rise to the challenge of truth, while others retreat into denial and dogma. Percy isn't a villain, but he is a cautionary tale, a reminder of how easy it is to lose oneself in the machinery of power. The absence of this letter in the movie not only flattens Percy's character, it also robs the Weasleys of one of their most difficult arcs. Fred and George, for instance, have no moment of reckoning with Percy in the films. In the book, their anger is sharp and cutting. They mock him, reject his views, and later, in Deathly Hallows, the slow, painful reconciliation becomes one of the most human moments in the entire series. But without the letter, that journey never begins. Percy is simply gone, then suddenly back. And no one asks why. This scene also reveals something critical about the Ministry's strategy. They aren't just fighting Dumbledore and Harry, they are seeding distrust, whispering poison into families, creating cracks that widen into chasms. Percy is a product of that campaign. He doesn't see himself as a traitor, he sees himself as right. The Ministry's propaganda has worked, not through force, but through persuasion. That's the terrifying part. And that's what the letter makes so clear. It's not a spell or a curse, it's words that break hearts. The emotional cost lingers across the book. Every time Molly glances at the door, hoping Percy might walk through it. Every time Ron stiffens at his name. Every time the family gathers without him, the reader feels the wound. It's not loud, it's not flashy, but it's real. And when Percy finally comes back, not in Order of the Phoenix, but much later, the moment is powerful precisely because of the letter. Because the reader remembers what he said, how cruel it was, and how long it took him to undo it. By erasing this moment, the films inadvertently protect Percy from judgment. Viewers don't see the full scope of his defection, and therefore they can't fully appreciate the courage it takes for him to return. His redemption arc, such as it is, becomes hollow. In the books, when Percy runs back to the family during the final battle, it's not just about fear, it's about guilt. It's about choosing love over pride, and finally seeing through the illusion of power that once seduced him. That's a transformation worth witnessing. And it begins with a letter.